Welcome to the University of Findlay's Art and Culture Show. I'm your host, Sharinda Welton, and today we have with us Mr. Adrian Carter. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's an honor. We always enjoy it when we have the opportunity to introduce new friends to our viewing community, and Adrian is currently on a national tour. He is many things.
Yes.
He is an author. He is a motivational speaker. He is also an individual who helps with conflict resolution. And there is a lot of conflict resolution that needs to be addressed these days.
Yes, a lot of conflict needs to be resolved, yeah.
And so
time.
Yes, very prime time. And you live in Florida, correct?
Yes, I live in South Florida.
Okay. And so your business takes you all over the world.
Yes, internationally, I've gone to many different locations doing training, speaking, talking about conflict resolution and leadership development, and also promoting my new book that I published earlier this year, Emerging as the Right Person in the Right Place at the Right Time, Leadership in the 21st Century Using the Ellison Model.
Wow. Now, the Ellison model is wonderful. I have done some research myself and studied on that. Would you like to share a little bit about that with our audience, please?
Yeah, the model was created by my mentor, Dr. Daryl G. Hunt, and he was a sociologist, and it's a social development model that looks at inclusion, multicultural appreciation, conflict resolution, mentorship, and relationship building. And he had a lot of components that created the model. And I've been under his tutelage, or was under his tutelage, since the age of 7.
Oh, wow.
He worked at Florida International University as a professor and as an associate director in student affairs. So I've walked in a lot of his footsteps. I've worked in higher education. I've used the model. I've been trained in the model. And I've also done consulting with him. We've worked even with government agencies in the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. I've done work in India, Sri Lanka, a lot of different places where the model has been able to be implemented. The model it helps people identify where conflict starts and where it ends. And essentially, the long and short of that is it's with the individual. Conflict is really a unitary process. I know there are a lot of factors that plays into it, right? You know, that a lot of parties, a lot of factors that are pressing that makes a person think that they have to respond the way that they have to respond. So the Ellison model teaches people how to first understand what inclusion looks like, how to include others within the sphere of diversity, and then move from diversity to unity and from community to an inclusive community. But all of that is really a unitary process. It's very interesting. I was listening to the radio and I heard someone say how that they felt that the time that they're in now is much more inclusive. People are willing to go to bat for what's right, and they feel that our society has grown and has matured. But what's interesting about that is the person feels that way because they have matured and grown. They've moved from a level of being into a level of being more inclusive, so they now occupy their life with more inclusivity. I call it the car effect. If you pick a car, you get a new car, and all of a sudden, like, oh, everybody drives this car. I didn't realize how many people drove that particular make and model. All of a sudden, you're much more aware of it. And that's how the Ellison model works. It helps us to become more aware and move into a space of inclusion. But you have to, and you can only do that, most importantly, by resolving the internal conflict that we're faced with.
So that's wonderful to have that example with the car and with the openness of one's mind because they are expanding themselves.
Right.
It's so interesting because so many times, and you mentioned that you've worked in higher ed, and I know that you are also a father, so you're raising your own children, and you even touched on it. So many times we look for someone or something to blame, or we look for permission to be happy or to be upset or to be infuriated. But we as a community often look for something that we can blame it on instead of focusing on our own responsibility and processing and analyzing and saying, you know what, everyone else is upset, but I can be okay with this.
Right, right.
And I'm not the bad person if I don't jump on a bandwagon.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they're not bad for being on the bandwagon.
They're
it's
not.
Just, I don't.
It's a process.
Yeah.
It really is a personal process. So I'm also a conflict coach. I'm finishing my PhD program in conflict resolution, conflict analysis and resolution, and I'm trained as a conflict coach and as a facilitator. So I work with individuals, couples, men. I specifically like to work with men. I think men are faced with conflict, and usually the social normative conversation around it is that men are not supposed to emote. Mm-hmm. It's not manly, right, to share your feelings. So I try to be a safe space for men to be able to have those kind of conversations. And when we talk about conflict coaching and how to resolve problems, people are always in a space of trying to identify their identity, their power, and their emotions. And they're always negotiating those three in any situation. And if you can get someone to understand that if they have more power than what they
give themselves permission.
Right. What they think they may have or give themselves permission to. And a lot of times they're waiting on someone to give them permission. Mm-hmm. And I understand that, even from my personal situations, how you're waiting for people who are key individuals in our lives to give us permission to do something. Mm-hmm. And how empowering it is to learn that actually you can give yourself permission. Right? If you can get centered within yourself. So because people are always negotiating their emotions, their power, and their identity, until someone is able to coach them through, or they're able to be motivated into understanding those key aspects of who they are, which goes back to resolving that conflict, then they're kind of stuck in that space until they're able to graduate to that next level. Mm-hmm. But that's why I enjoy the work that I do, because I'm able to help people move from one level to the next. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's why you're good at what you do.
I appreciate that.
Because just we had the opportunity to meet at a national conference, and you had done a wonderful presentation there that was open to everyone at the conference.
Right, thank you.
And afterwards, we had the opportunity to really have some good conversations on a couple different occasions. And that was one thing that struck me about you, Adrian, is that you walk the talk. And you are constantly working on yourself first,
right? Yeah.
But you don't put a wall up, so that you're very open to receiving other people in conversation and getting them where they're at,
right,
and making them comfortable. And even when we had the opportunity a little bit ago to meet a couple students walking across campus, one of them pulled me aside and said, I loved his picture. When I saw his picture, I could just tell he was a big teddy bear, but he is just so nice and so caring. And there's not a lot of genuine people out there.
I appreciate that.
I love that you're doing the work you're doing, because it's going to go a lot farther.
I appreciate that.
With the way
I really
you invest.
do. I've learned a couple things along my journey. I first feel that my life has to be an open book. I've learned to be transparent and to allow people in, because the movie Sixth Sense, where the kid says, I see dead people, like I see hurt people.
Mm-hmm. You can see through their eyes to the soul.
Yep.
And that's why India loves you.
Yeah. And will she be there tonight?
She will, yeah.
Okay. And it was phenomenal when I first had that experience. I was doing a presentation. I was speaking somewhere in Broward County, and I looked into the room and I was like, y'all hurt. Mm-hmm. All of you. You all have this big facade up about who you are, and you have to pretend, because you have a job to do, you have a family to raise, but who has ever really taken the time to sit down with you and unpack, right? And for that. And at that moment, I realized that, it's a gift. Mm-hmm. It's not a curse. Mm-mm. It's a gift. And I try to lead, and I've learned to be better at just being transparent, being open, being vulnerable, because it models for other people that you can be those things and still be successful, right? But that was a process for me. You know, I didn't just get there yesterday. You know, it's been a process for me, and me learning how to do the very things that I'm coaching on, resolve the conflict for myself. And the highest creed in the field of conflict resolution is physician, heal thyself. Awesome thing about that is, before even going into my doctoral program, my mentor taught me that. It sounded crazy to me at first, physician, heal thyself. But the creed is what it's saying is, if you are a doctor, how can you be a most effective doctor to others if you are not able to heal yourself, if you're not able to medicate yourself, if you're not able to identify what's wrong and fix that within you? So it's one thing to be able to help everybody else and can't help yourself. But if you know how to help yourself, it humanizes you in such a way that it connects you to other people, because you understand.
How much more you can give, yes.
Right. So that's what's important for me in this process.
Well, and everyone is a miracle. Some people have not gotten to that place in their life where they've realized where their miracle is.
Right.
And that's part of sometimes the healing. But you have had a very special journey, and you have had, as everyone does, you have had a story that has probably empowered you to see the importance of being transparent,
Right.
so that in addition to healing others, you could heal yourself. And I don't want to go all the way down that journey, but I do want to touch on how that affected the steps that you've taken in the evolution of your profession, because you have worked in higher education, and you didn't do it for 18 months and say, all right, I'm finding something else to do. I'm burnt out. No, you invested some long
I have 11 years.
11, and that's awesome.
Yeah, that's significant. And most of those years, at least 8 of those years, was being an administrator.
In student affairs
In
side
student
of
affairs,
things.
yep.
And for the viewers,
And being an adjunct faculty member as well.
great. God bless you.
Yeah.
For viewers, they may not know that the national norm for people working in student affairs within the higher activity realms of the departments is only 12 months to 18 months.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then
Wow.
they're stepping on to something else, or to a new project or a new department, because they burn out, because there's
Right.
so much going on, there's so much demand. You really have to learn to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So in higher ed and administration, what were some of the things that you saw that you were able to, within your journey, teach the students how to be more transparent to themselves and work on that process without them feeling like they were getting schooled every time they came in your office?
Right. Well, what was interesting, I was working at a community college, and when I was a student at the university, when I was an undergrad, I was a very active student and did a lot of leadership things. I was a student government president, very involved on campus, and it was a different dynamic working at a state college now, they're now state colleges, than being at a university. What I learned was that they needed a different type of empowerment. You have students who were first-time students in college, or they had low grades coming out of high school, so the state college is their best opportunity before they could go on to the university. So trying to empower students at that level, took some learning, right? I had to learn how to do that. One of the things, though, that I was happiest about was having a program that allowed me to teach the Ellison model, even to our students then. So the Ellison model has always been a fabric of almost everything, of everything I've been and who I am. But my most successful time with the model came after working in higher ed. It came because eventually I had to come face to face with the man in the mirror and move from being knowledgeable of the model to becoming the model. Right, and that came after higher ed. So, but I did a lot of good things in higher ed and teaching our students. We had a training program. We used to take the students up to Tallahassee as a leadership development, as part of their leadership development program. I've advised student government. I've advised our student programming board and our high-level achieving leadership students. But the yellow stigmata is always present. My journey, though, for me came best when I confronted that matter that you started to talk about, and I talk about it because it's important. I'm a victim of having been sexually abused as a child, and then that rolled over into my personal relationship when I was married, and that had an impact there, and that relationship ended in divorce, and I had to find a way out of all of that convolution and be able to resign myself to resolving those conflicts, addressing my power, my identity, my emotions. And what was amazing about that is even my own conflict resolution program became a part of my process. So it's been an amazing journey to watch everything come full circle, right? So to go from being the victim to being the victor, to know how to now show other people like, oh yeah, I know what it is for your world to end, but I also know what it is to rebuild and to watch everything flourish all over again. And people tend to not like to talk about those hard subjects, which is why I make it a point to talk about the hard subjects, right? Because if you don't, who's going to?
Sure.
Most people will hide behind those veils and of just trying to live our daily lives because we're bogged down with jobs and what the political atmosphere is and what the news is saying and family and life is hard in that way. But someone has to be the beacon. Someone has to be a representative, to take that torch and run out there and be like, hey, listen, I understand what it's like to be in these different spaces. And so that's why my leadership book I think is very important. That's why the next book that I'm working on that deals with relationships and conflict resolution from an interpersonal relationship with romantic relationships is also going to be very important.
And I was going to ask you if you were working on any other projects in writing. Yeah. And so in addition to working on your doctorate, you are also currently authoring a second book.
Yes, I'm very close to my dissertation phase for my doctorate. So I'm trying to wrap this book up before, but this book it is also a conflict resolution related book, but it's very specific. It's talking about marriages, and it's a book that speaks to men. And in this book, I'm challenging a lot of the social norms that talks about the role of a man in our Western society. And what I have found is that it is a bedrock of conflict in the mantra of provide and protect, in the mantra of what the role of a man is with these social norms, in what the expectation of a man is in terms of working, in terms of fathering. And what has happened is we have a changing world. There's a paradigm shift. In the process of how men view themselves in trying to live up to these expectations, they experience a lot of emotional things, what their power is, what their identity is as a man, and how that's tied into all of these fabrics of society, how that impacts our role with women. All of that, though, it ends up leading to hyper-masculinity, violence, and just on the fact that, we'll say, for example, women are emotional. As a social norm, as part of that social conversation, that dominant dialogue, women are emotional, men are logical. Well, that's not true. It's just not true. Human beings are emotional, period.
I'm logically emotional.
Right. Exactly. We all operate out of emotion. Men are very emotional. The trend would be that a man wants to take the position that, well, I'm not emotional. He holds on to those feelings in the sense of, in the hope of not being emotional, but then later has to emote. Your feelings are going to come out somehow, but then it comes out in your hypermasculinity, in chauvinism, in violence, against the very entities, women, who you say that, well, they're the ones who are emotional. Well, everything is an act of emotion, right? It's all linked. So so the book looks at those type of issues. It also looks at other social norms that I think men are challenged with. I think men today are challenged with the notion of provision. I think it's a change. It's a shift in sand, because we now have and have had women for quite some time who are a part of the academic world, the professional world. They have upward mobility, they have economic success, but then some men are trying to hold on to we're supposed to provide, and it's supposed to look like this. But provision is not about provision when we talk about it from the lens of conflict. Provision is about power. So it's not about necessarily providing, it's about maintaining a certain level of power within the relationship. Economics is a means of power as well. So women want to work, want to be economically empowered, right, so that they can be self-sustaining in a way, but men also want to hold on to the notion, well, I'm supposed to be the one that holds this mantle as breadwinner. In other words, you're taking away my power. At the same time, though, women try to hold men accountable in that way, as a way to say that they have the power, but she also wants to maintain her own power. It gets very convoluted, but all of it is conflict. So I'm hoping in this book to be able to address the undertone of where those come from. I believe everything has a religious background. I want to address the 5 things that we're always negotiating. In addition to emotions, power, and identity, we live in a world that we are always negotiating our economics, our political, religious, social, and psychological spaces. We are those individuals all at once. Everything we do is always attached to that. And those things inform how we identify ourselves, how we see ourselves, the power we have, and the emotions that we have that's wrapped around it. So you see how they're connected. So it gets very brainy and deep. I get that. But it's kind of like going in and looking at the vessels and the veins and the skeleton of how conflict is created in our society, filtering down to the individual, filtering down to the relationships that we have as men, as women in romantic spaces, but also even in work-related spaces and not, in our social settings. But I hope that book can offer some answers to how we view each other in order to calm the spirit, to ultimately arrive to this, what I call the we conversation. We provide and protect for each other. We take care of each other. We are invested in each other. If couples made that distinction as opposed to a man is supposed to do this or a woman is supposed to do that, that changes the dynamics of it, right? If we're working together, it changes the dynamic. If, well, you're responsible for that, I'm not, no, well, we are ultimately responsible. We want to make sure that we're teaching our students or leading our students or communicating to our students what's effective for them. So the we conversation is essentially, I think, the most important thing that we have to get to in order to resolve those conflicts.
Wow.
I'm sorry for the long answer.
Don't ever be sorry
It's
for
a long
teaching.
answer.
Because while you were sharing, I'm thinking about the travels you've done internationally, and I'm very curious about with the book and with the conflict that you've sensed and you've seen. Yes, it's here in this country, but there are different norms and different dichotomies and different rituals and things in other parts of the world, or I will say in other worlds, because point of reference, homeland is a world, and then you move to others. So in your travels to Sri Lanka and in your travels to India, as well as to some of the islands,
Jamaica.
So have you had the opportunity within the relationships you've built and within the communities you've worked in to be able to do some research there, or have you been able to pick up on any of the culture and the way that communication is just naturally taking place in those countries that have also found their ways into this book?
In part. So what I've observed is the westernized way of thinking about things is very different from the rest of the world. Unfortunately, Westerners think that Westerners is the only part of the world.
We're always right.
Right, you know, like the rest of the world doesn't exist.
I know.
We're the center of the world.
It's so sad.
That it is. You know, the more global you become, and that's one of the things that I teach from the perspective of the Ellison model. Inclusion is about globalized thinking. And so the more inclusive you are, is the more you realize that right looks different in different places and
Exactly,
hold the
it's a point
same
of
value,
reference.
right? They all hold the same value. One thing I've noticed from my studies and from my travels is that, you know, some societies are matriarchal. Not all societies are patriarchal. And I think we undermine that. Women play different roles in certain societies. What we take to be so important in other places are not as important. And then there's some overlap. I studied one country in Africa where the women, I think the river dries up and it turns to salt. And so a part of the year they collect the salt from the river in order to, and then they sell it, and that's what they use to live their life on. But I heard one of the women say that the men were not as helpful, but the women are the ones who actually do the work of gathering the salt. The men sell the salt, but then one woman made the comment how that, well, after he gets the money, he goes and chases women with the money instead of bringing it back home. And I thought that was interesting dynamics, because I've heard that here in America, right? Then, but then they also have a society. One thing that's also pretty consistent is what marriage is viewed as across societies. Even in that society, being a single woman, you're shunned. So one of the things that my book addresses, though, is just the fact that women are subjugated in the belief that their rites of passage is within marriage, which means a man has to approve who they are before they can be accepted into womanhood. That's very interesting. The problem with provision and protection is that the womanhood is established through his provision and protection, which empowers him over her. But yet her power is to hold him accountable for provision and protection. But it becomes a battle to see who is going to be, who's going to maintain the most power in the relationship.
And yet it's so close to being a we, if they could break down some of those.
Exactly.
Because it's a circle.
Exactly.
It's a circle, but if they
it's
could
like
get
there's this
on
one little thin little strip line. If I could just move that line away, you could realize, oh, the we. You know, if we're doing this and we're in this together, it really changes the fabric of the conversation. And then you have in other countries where, women are more dominant in our societies. But even historically, there was a time where in some Indian tribes where the women were the only one who selected the chief, right? The men would be the chief, but they were selected by the women. It's just, you travel around the world and you learn different parts of history. One of the parts I like to tell is our professor told us a part of Africa where a researcher, an anthropologist went in, and the anthropologist went native, which means they joined the society, they dress like them. So in their society, the women are topless. And so she goes native, she's topless, she's immersing herself into the community. She's walking down the road, and an elder woman calls her over. People are staring at her. And it was a Caucasian lady in this black African culture, or a group of people. So they're calling her over. And guess what the problem was?
I have no idea.
Her ankles were showing.
Oh.
Her skirt was too high.
I was getting ready to say her skirt wasn't long enough.
Right.
Okay.
Her ankles. The ankles is the it. Like, that's
the
what
offense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what is celebrated. Like when I say the it, like
I get it.
Like whoa, hey, those are some nice ankles. Like that's what I want to get to know your name.
That's what causes the stumble.
That's what causes the stumbling block over there. It's not that she's topless. So when you begin to look at this, another interesting story. One of the things that we've studied is I don't remember the name of these tribes or these groups of people, but one of a group of, I think it was Westerners, Americans, went into a certain part of Africa. In their dialect or in their language, there was no term for he or she. There was no gender-based language. You know, like how in Spanish there's niño and niña. In their language, there was no, there's nothing that denoted what was he, male or female. Well, because the Westerners are used to that,
They needed an identifier.
right? They needed the identifier, so they inserted that. They pushed for that into their language. They adopted it, and then they began to see a new kind of conflict. Then it became a she did, or a he did, or a he said, or a she said. It didn't exist before. So it goes, you know, it's that rich, it's that deep, you know, when you begin to look across other societies to understand how, if we can remove these parts of conflict. You know, as a physician, if you will, I'm just looking at our social world and where I see a particular issue, and I'm able to identify it, and I believe I can have some answers to help remedy it. You know, I go in.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So in addition to healing and also writing, you are a poet.
Yes.
And I've had the opportunity to hear some of your poetry. Yeah. It's amazing.
Thank you.
What inspired you to start reflecting through words, through poetry?
My third grade teacher, Mr. Branson,
It's
who
all
made me
his
upset.
fault.
It's all his fault. So Mr. Branson was upset with me. I don't know what I was doing in class, but I remember feeling there was an injustice, but I was told to be quiet, and I wanted to say something like, be quiet, and the only thing I could do was grab a pencil and a paper and just write. And because whatever I wanted to say, it was like pouring through my arm, and I was like, teachers are the meanest creatures. The first two lines of a poem I ever wrote. Teachers are the meanest creatures, and it just flowed from there. And so I've been writing poetry since I was 9 years old, in the third grade. The poetry is really no different for me as a sociologist, as a social scientist, in that it's just a more creative way of me presenting a take on the world. Yes, it's cathartic, but when you look at my poetry, it's all a social inquiry. You know, it's all a social statement about something going on in society. Poetry is powerful because it's creative. People are able to accept the creativity of it, because people love poetry, and particularly spoken word, you know, and being on stage and interacting with the audience, and you get a gamut of different types of poets. I've published 3 poetry books prior to doing my leadership development book, and I think poetry it's what I like about it is it allows me to emote in a very deep way, but I could also mask it. I like being able to mask it. That's taught me so much, though, about understanding text. You know, I can give an analogy about something in a poem that alludes to one thing, but you would have to ask me what it really means, because it means something totally.
You can take it a totally different way.
It's totally different.
Well, and with poetry, sometimes that's the really cool thing about it. You are sharing your story, but someone that is searching can receive the answer they're looking for.
Right.
They are able to get and interpret and receive what they're open to receiving. And it's like you said, it may be totally different. And they may come up and say, I'm so glad you wrote that, because I can identify with that too, because this happened to me too. And then as the poet, you have to be, well, you don't have to be, but it's nice if you're very kind and generous.
Oh, yeah, you don't necessarily have to tell
But you
them.
walk away going, I was nowhere near what was happening in my world when I wrote that.
In February of next year, I'm planning a men's empowerment conference. It's called Empower Men Conference. And one of the components of that is to have a poetry night. But it just won't be a performance. I'm calling it Rhyme and Reason. And I want to be able, in a similar setup, to be able to have the poet perform, but I want to talk about the poem. I want to talk about where did it come from, what was the emotions, what made you write it, what was the situation that led to it. Because, again, in a social world where I think men are becoming much more, they emote a lot more and they're showing their sensitivity. But I want to be able to show that side of a man, to show the thought process that goes into it, right? It's not very random that a man just puts these words together. And of course, the same thing for a woman, but again, you know, specifically,
Your
I like
focus
working
for
on,
that one is for
working,
the men.
is working
I get
with
it,
men.
yeah.
But poetry allows me to mask some things. And it really is just a part of who I am. You know what I'm saying? I've been doing, I write poetry, I write music, I produce, I record. So I'm a creative. That's been a part of who I am for in a very long time.
Well, and I do want to thank you for what you're doing for our men, because I've watched over the years that I've worked with higher ed, the male population coming in and saying, I don't know where I fit in. I knew where I fit in fourth grade, but then things started to change.
Right.
The politics started to change, or something happened in their family, and so then the family dynamics changed. And they'll come into my office and say, I'm not sure where I fit. I used to know. And I can listen and I can help and I can support, but them having the opportunity to talk with another man about that, or to hear from another man that I've been on that struggle bus, I think that's so valuable. And then for the men who have been in the workplace for 10, 20 years and now are saying, things have really changed.
Right.
But where's my safe place where I can talk about this, where I'm not being told that I'm the problem, when it's truly, I'm not a problem. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around what the new expectations are, and also know that I'm not being left out or forgotten or missed, or a new segregation. I've heard that.
Oh, I read a book called Angry White Men, and it talked about the voting bloc of Trump, rural America, what their challenges are. Phenomenal book. Last name Kimmel is the author, and he talks about angry white men, kids, and other social infrastructures that have left a part of the population angry. I took that and I realized, I said, you know what? Everybody has a reason to be angry. So in this new book that I'm writing, I acknowledge angry white men, I acknowledge angry black men, women, and angry children. Children have a right to be angry.
You.
Children feel abandoned. Children, I mean, if you really think about this, at the end of the day, because I also work with school-age children, at the end of the day, most people, and children included, they're looking for direction and leadership. And at the end of the day, even though they may like to play video games and do some of the things that they do that's just childish, they still want structure. They still want compassion. They still want stability. A lot of children are missing that. And they know, even though it's funny, even though they like it, they know that a lot of what social media offers them is not substantive. They know. They're very bright. Their social intelligence is off the charts. They may not be as book smart. Their reading and writing or their comprehension may be a little low, and some may be high, but they know right from wrong. I think a great example of that are the students from Stoneman Douglas when we talk about South Florida and the shooting that happened on campus. Look at how bright those kids were and are, and how they became politically motivated, they mobilized, and they've been on a path about gun reform after what they experienced. Our kids are not dumb, but they do feel abandoned.
And we give them permission to feel that way.
And they're upset. In the book, I talk about how black men, for a number of reasons, are upset, how women are upset. Everybody has a right to be angry.
But everyone also has the right to be happy.
They do. They do. And I think we arrive there, or one of the ways to arrive there is if we can identify. I said, you know what, Sharinda, I understand you have a right to feel the way that you feel. And and if you can understand that we have a right to feel that we feel, something about that understanding makes us say, okay, well, good. At least we understand each other. Let's move on to doing better. Coming back to that we conversation. And the Ellison model ultimately is about the we conversation. It's about inclusive community building. That's us. That's understanding the reciprocity of the we. If we can come to that place of understanding that folks have a right to feel what they feel because our society has put so much on us. We are both a part of the problem, but we are also the solution to it, right? It's not like zonkies and monkeys, right, are making this world up and making it happen, and we have to do what apes and gorillas and squirrels running around are telling us to do. No, we're human beings. We actually, as much as we are contributing to the problem, we have the ability to change and to solve. And that's what I think the Ellison model brings to the table, and that's why I go as hard as I do. Men need a space, ultimately, to be able to share, emote, and grow because the world is changing. And it has changed. The Me Too movement has changed things just like that, and for the better. But how do men who are used to living in a patriarchal society that's becoming more balanced now operate, right? How do men now change their mentality around women who they may have grown up in a space, well, you're supposed to be barefoot and pregnant or in the kitchen. I don't know. That's been so out of style for so long. Men who still think like that need a tongue lashing and a belt. But for men who are still grappling with the changing or the paradigm shift in our society, they need direction and leadership in how to make that transition. And it can't be because you're a man, you're supposed to know. And I write about that in the book. There's something in our society that just says, by definition of being a man, you're supposed to know. You're supposed to leave home, go off into the world, become worldly about and understand everything, and come home, and you're supposed to just know what to do as a man. And men don't know. They're just as lost, just as vulnerable, and just as emotional as women are. So what you end up realizing is that this is not a man or a woman thing. This is a human thing.
And something you said at the beginning of the show, and as we close out the show, I want to come back to it and then ask for your contact information so that our viewers will be able to follow up and read some of your writings, find your poetry, and then potentially find one of your conferences and get enrolled in that. But something you said was from victim to victor. And it goes back to everything that you have shared today and that we have talked about. We all have a right to be upset about something.
Right.
We all have the right to have victory, and we can do that if we become we. So, Mr. Adrian Carter.
I'm going to take that and use that, right? That,
well,
you wrapped
I just
it up
took
great.
it from everything.
You wrapped it up greatly,
from
absolutely.
what you do in your presentations and from what you write, that's what I've taken away. That's my takeaway. And I'm excited that you are out there and that you are on campuses, you're in workforces, you're in other countries, you're in government, helping them think about becoming a victorious victor in we.
Right.
And please give us your contact information so our viewers will be able to follow up with you.
I am available on social media. My Instagram is Adrian Carter Speaks. YouTube is Adrian Carter Speaks. I'm also available on Facebook, Adrian Carter Speaks. And you could always contact me. My email address is build@adriancarter.solutions. And my website is www.adriancarter.solutions. So it's not a .com, don't get confused with that, but .solutions, because I'm the solution expert dealing with conflict resolution and building solutions with people.
And you definitely are building solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. We look forward to hosting another episode and you joining us of the University of Findlay Art and Culture Show. I am Sharinda. Be well.